Hello. There are few Russians who do not know how much the Germans hate Russia. Bakunin wrote and he added, "This hatred is one of the strongest national passions of Germany. On this flight, games without frontiers, war without tears. The hate-love relationship between the new Germany and Russia would result not only in a cultural Russophobia, but a brutal racist variant against a peer European competitor." I'm welcoming you to A1 Candy Bomber. Glad you could join us. Here we do sell flowers in the fish market of ideas. So I'm on our flight. You have your cup of tea, or in my case, I'm having a triple shot of freshly ground and brewed coffee. We're ready to fly. Mikhail Bakunin, in full, Mikhail Alexandrovich, I hope I didn't speak Russian, Bakunin, born in 1814 in Premyukino, Russia, I probably murdered that, and died in 1876 in Bern, Switzerland. Chief protagonitor of 19th century anarchism, a prominent Russian revolutionary agitator and a prolific political writer. His quarrel with Karl Marx split anarchist and Marxist wings of the revolutionary socialist movement for many decades after their deaths. And these quotes come from Frank Mitz's edition of his book Bakunin, Criticism and Action, published in Buenos Aires from Ner's Books, 2006. Marx frequently refers, in example, to the, quote, Russian Knut. So that's K-N-U-T. In times of the Crimean War, it became popular in German, English, French, Dutch, and other European languages, the term Knut to refer to Russia. Bear with me. The Knut is a typical Russian whip, also called the punishment that was applied with it for certain crimes. So if you indulged in banditry, for instance, in Russia, you were said to have committed a Knut crime. So we understand that. A Knout, spelt Russian K-N-O-U-T, is a heavy scourge like multiple whips. So many whips coming out, usually made of a series of rawhide thongs attached to a long handle. So we get the idea. Sometimes with metal wires or hooks incorporated. Nasty piece of work it is. The English word stems from a spelling pronunciation of a French transliteration of the Russian word Knut, K-N-U-T, which simply means whip. And as we have explored this, we can see the French are always stirring the pot, aren't they? The syllable Knut means baby boy. Is a name, so in other words, it's a name for a baby boy, Knut. pronounced K-N-U-W-T in German, or Knut. We can see where we're going here. Knut has its origins in the Old Norse language. It is used largely in English, German, and Scandinavian for the name of a baby boy to be given. In Old Norse, it's Knutur, K-N-U accent inflection to the right. T-R is an older form of the name. The name is ultimately from the Old Norse Knutur, or else the Old German Knit, and its meaning is of that race or of that kind of people. And this is a cross-referenced meaning through Word Hippo and the Britannica. So we can see where the Anglified with a C first name of Canute, the King of Britain, the Scandinavian King of Britain, King Canute, who was also Emperor of the North Sea lands of Scandinavia and other possessions like the Faroe Islands, etc. So his name originally would have been King of that kind, or King of those tribes. Very interesting. The two meanings folded into each other, that is the meaning of the Russian meaning of it as a lash, and that of the tribe or the people came together in the 19th century and reflected the collective state of mind of the aforementioned nation's elites. So we're talking about, again, all we have mentioned, all those ones. During the 19th century, in several European languages, this term was used as a synonym for Russia. How interesting. What is so take your pick. Slave people, not slave people, it would be people with the whip or people under the whip. Very interesting, isn't it? Fear and loathing. Hegel and a part of German idealism denied the Russians any contribution of European civilization and even the right to an independent life without the tutelage of the superior peoples. Now, I'm not going to talk about Hegel very much, except to quote the famous contemporary literature critic from Spain, Jesus Maestro, who, upon reading the complete works of Hegel, had this to say about their totality. Metaphysical emotional hysteria. That's all I've got to say. It was a ridiculous way of putting the situation in a divided and mostly poor German states, because this is before the unification into modern Germany, where the last remnants of slavery and serfdom in Western Europe still survived and was not eradicated completely till later. Like France, pre-unified Germany projects onto Russia its enormous historical frustrations. Now, this is not Austria, which I consider the first Germany. So let's get that into perspective. Russophobia, therefore, takes root and feeds on the less noble parts of the human being, although its elaboration requires manipulation mechanisms that are very consciously handled by the agents that shape them in each case. And in this case, we are talking that most propaganda is created and disseminated and internalized and externalized by the elites of a nation or an empire or a corporative state that we have here, if they spread and spread so easily, it is because they flatter and the inherent racism of the species in its most basic form. So now we're discussing the human nature. To be a higher self, there must be a lower self. So this is the slave master mentality of elitism. Like this, it is difficult to show in front of peoples who are not exactly insignificant, bear with me, in the sweep of history. In the last 1,000 years, Russia. Russophobia is a form of racism that requires an additional orchestration and intellectual scaffolding that feeds and comforts the peoples with bruised egos. So in our case, it is Germany, or the new Germany, or the dismembered Germany up until modern era. It should therefore not be surprised that Karl Marx was ready to collaborate with David Urquhart in the anti-Russian campaign of the Free Press. The Free Press is one of Urquhart's newspapers during the biennium of 1856 to 1857, which of course is the decade of the Crimean War. After all, he had inherited from a German idealism, and from Hegel, to be more precise, a visceral Russophobia. If you want to know more about David Urquhart, go back over my flights, the series of Russophobia. I discuss David Urquhart in more detail. This remained a constant source of friction between the revolutionaries in the post-Crimean War period. The clashes between Bakunin and Marx were especially intense. The German was very concerned about the growth of Russian imperial power. In mid-April 1871, Bakunin published in Geneva the first part of the Knuto Germanic Empire and the Socialist Revolution. You see what he's done there? He's flipped it on its head because he knows what's being produced as propaganda coming out of the Western Europe. And being a very successful propagandist himself, Bakunin turns the mirror back onto Germany. He explains here that to quote, the excellent German patriot, Karl Marx, is completely wrong when he accuses Russian influence of being the cause of all of new Germany's ills, and that Marx should have, to quote, used his immense erudition, to understand that the German states, quote, it has historically produced, carried and developed in itself all the elements of its present slavery. So what is he talking about? He's talking about the newly created proletariat after the Franco-Prussian War of 1871 or 1870-1871, when Prussia wins and new Germany is created out of other kingdoms that have been assimilated, like Bavaria. And you have this great mass of people, the proletariat of the new Germany, being ruled by these aristocratic, feudalistic, master-slave mentality. So Bakunin is speaking truth or facts to Marx. But he knows that Marx, to quote, will avoid telling the whole truth on this point. And this comes from the Germanic Knut Empire and the Social Revolution. This is where I've quoted from, and its files are extant, if you want to look it up, on wordpress.com, the Social Revolution in France onwards, 2013. Karl Marx, and I won't go deeply into who Karl Marx is, I'll just give you bare bones for those people who have very little knowledge of him. In full, Karl Heinrich Marx was born in 1818 in Trier, Rhine province, Prussia, not Germany. This is before the Franco-Prussian War. Died in 1883 in London, England. Revolutionary, sociologist, historian and economist. He published with Friedrich Engels. Now, I want to draw attention to Friedrich Engels because without Friedrich Engels, I would say without doubt, Karl Marx would be a footnote in history because he pushed and pushed, and if you get to just go back and find out, they were partners. And we give all the credit to Marx, but Friedrich Engels made sure that everything got published, everything got written, everything was disseminated, and he championed and pushed the disciples of Marx forward into the world after his death. So, what do they produce? Manifest der Kommunistischen Partei, 1848. I don't know German, so I probably mangled that. Commonly known as the Communist Manifesto. It's very short. I encourage you to read it. Otherwise, get the audio version. The most celebrated pamphlet in the history of the socialist movement. The socialist tree. This is one of its branches, communism. He also was the author of the movement's most important book, Das Kapital, This Capital. Very famous. And if it wasn't for, again, Engels, forget it. These writings and others by Marx and Engels formed the basis of the body of thought and belief known as Marxism. And that's from Britannica Online 2022. Now, famously, Marx said, "I am not a Marxist, I am a communist," which is fair enough because he created the idea, the utopian solution to capitalism, which is communism, right? It was, so why would he be himself? He is himself. It's his work. Marxists, of course, are his disciples, usually. It is comfortable to isolate the monster, Russia, to deny any vestige of contamination. But these ideas have a history and a context, sometimes a very respectable one. How respectable? Here we go. Bit of water after a triple shot of coffee. Otherwise, I'm sure you'll enjoy your cup of tea. To you, Germania. Houston Stuart Chamberlain. Born British and naturalized German, Houston Stuart Chamberlain was actually born in 1855, South Sea, Hampshire, in England, and died in 1927 in Beirut, Germany. British-born Germophile political philosopher whose advocacy of the racial and cultural superiority of the so-called Aryan element in European cultural influence, pan-German, and German nationalist thought, particularly the socialist national movement of the 20th century. And we all know how that ended. Had assimilated Gobineaus. We've spoken about Gobineaus. I still haven't figured out how to pronounce that. About the inequality of the races and had proclaimed that, after all, the natural destiny of the Slavs was to be slaves. Charming. And here we come to the heart of the nut, or the nut of the heart. With this, he joked about the origin of this word in many languages of Western Europe. The word Slav actually comes from slave, he insisted. And it was throughout the Middle Ages supplanting the Latin term servus, or slave servant, due to the influx of enslaved prisoners of this origin that were sold in Europe, fundamentally from the raids of and by the feudal lords of German states, North African Saracens, and the Ottoman Turks. Slavers, in other words. Like the peoples of southern Europe, the slaves, or Slavs, were the result of the degeneration of the Aryan race by mixing with other inferior peoples. This is quite laughable considering the only Indo-Aryans in existence are from India. You can't make this up. Who is Arthur the Gibonau? We've spoken about him before, but we are going to speak about him again. In full, Joseph Arthur Comte, or Count, de Gobineau, born in 1816 in Ville d'Avray, or Avray, France, died in 1882 in Turin, Italy. Nice place, Turin. French diplomat, writer, ethnologist, and social thinker whose theory of racial determinism had an enormous influence upon the subsequent development of racist theories and practices of Western Europe. Gibonau was a member of an aristocratic royalist family, so we know where this is heading. He went to Paris in 1835, held a succession of minor clerical posts, and began to frequent aristocratic literary circles. He was well educated in languages and Oriental culture, and he served as secretary to the writer and statesman Alex de Tocqueville, who we've also spoken about before. Go and watch my series. During the latter's brief term as foreign minister in France in 1849. Gobineau, it has to be said that Gobineau also rose to the position of consular in, so he ran a consul in Turkey, I believe, for a while. So he did achieve some success beyond an attachment to the foreign minister in the diplomatic corps. Gobineau, Adolf, and we know who that is, and Chamberlain are set apart in the circle of cursed names, but many others who share their ideas, or racist ideas, are adored and revered. Still, in Europe today, without a hint of shadow of criticism, his prestige and extraordinary socio-intellectual position contributed to legitimizing perverse ideas, making them popular and credible. Names that still arouse our deepest admiration today. Who are these? Such as Voltaire, Rousseau, Goethe, Fichte, or Hegel shared anti-Semitic ideas about the meaning of skulls. Yes, skulls. This is the abominable fraud pseudoscience of phrenology. And they all were in it. And guess who were inferior? Not their mob. Or about the natural inferiority of Mediterranean peoples or Slavic slaves. And this comes from On Racism in Voltaire, Rousseau, Fichte, and Hegel by the German academic Gudrun Henteg's Dark Sides of Enlightenment, the portrayal of Jews and savages in philosophical writings of the 18th and 19th century, published by Schweichelbach, Russophobia, I probably murdered German there, in 1999 in Germany, obviously. And it has come to my attention through this investigation of many episodes now, and reading endless amounts of articles and treatises and books, that the Enlightenment wasn't very much light. Most of it seemed to be very dark and sinister indeed, which we need to do a reappraisal of the whole Enlightenment project. Right. To bring all the loose ends of the knot together, what changed Karl Marx's mind on Russia and his newfound love affair? That the Rus would be the hope of the communist revolution utopia state. This conversion on the road to Damascus. How did this hate-love pendulum between German elites and Germany, the new Germany, and Russia come about? Why was this love affair, and manifest today, I might add? Firstly, in 1861, the Russian slave serfs were emancipated by Tsar Alexander II, creating a new proletariat that began a mass migration of peasants to new industrial centers like St. Petersburg, Moscow, or Odessa, just to name a few. Secondly, after the catastrophic failures of the pan-continental European progressive revolutions of 1848, ignited by the British stock market meltdown of 1846, or better known as the railway mania bubble. So we had the first explosion of came to be called laissez-faire capitalistic economics. So the utopia of a capitalistic economic and national revolution came to an end in this massive railway expansion and corruption of the railway mania. This caused the near collapse of the banking system in the City of London and Britain generally. And this stock market collapse was only, the empire was nearly dragged under by it, the British Empire, and only the government installing the Bank of England as the central bank and the regulation of the banks to save the elite structure of the economy was a complete imperial disaster averted. However, the economic ramifications spread over to the continent, and the meltdown of other stock exchanges around Europe meant the loss of fortunes and livelihoods of everyday people, and especially the middle class, and therefore the ignition of the revolutions of 1848 across the continent. They failed. In the end, with Marx's despair of any hope and of a dejected and demoralized working class uprising in Prussia at the time, and later in Germany after the triumphant Prussian victory over the French and the creation of Imperial Germany, any hopes of a communist utopia had been dashed, revolution of course, or in Britain, where the working class was downtrodden. And if you see in Charles Dickens, the subjugation and the sheer slavery, working class slavery, they were well under control, despite the Union uprising. did he, Marx, in later life, pin most of his hopes on the proletariat of the Russian motherland. And of course, under the tiller and guidance, specifically, of German communism, or communist thought, and the leadership of that class and elite of people, of course. So we've come to the end of the 19th century. And it seems obvious where this is all heading. We're going to be discussing the 20th century in our next episode, and we're fast coming to its end. And I hope you stay with us, because it is I would like to talk about really what is going to be rather truncated 20th century because of the Soviet Union, which takes out about 70% of the history of Russia. So we're going to move from Imperial Russia, which more or less is dissolved by the Bolsheviks after World War I, after the civil war between the whites and the reds, and then the reinstitution of the Federated Republic of Russian Federation right at the end of the 20th century. So as we know, the Soviet Union is a deviation where Russia is subsumed into a greater communist empire. So which should be very interesting to have a look at exactly what happened to Russophobia in the 20th century. Thank you for attending. And if you have any queries, please leave commentary, like the video, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.